Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're excited to have an esteemed panelist here with full of ESPN personalities brought to you here to talk a lot more about Total QBR. So from left to right, we're going to say we have Hank Gargiulo, Dean Oliver, Albert Larcata, Peter Keating, and Jeff Bennett. So with that, I'll turn it over to the group.
Thank you very much. I am Jeff Bennett. I'm the Senior Director of ESPN's Production Analytics team. And what's going to happen over here in the next hour is a little different than what this room has seen over the last 48 hours. So what we're doing here is going to have more of a presentation feel. I'm going to give an overview of kind of the backstory about QBR and how we got there to the rating system. And then Dean and Peter will take more of a deep dive into how we create the rating, some of the stories that we told throughout the fall, and some of the things we learned along the way that were most interesting to us. So to start off, the analytics team, when we were formed, we are going to help create sports metrics and tools to help ESPN innovate in the way that we tell stories with advanced statistics across all our platforms. So we start off as looking at projects to prioritize for the 2011 year. And at the top of the list, it was pretty obvious. We should start with the NFL. For one thing, 2011 at ESPN was the year of the quarterback. There's a big content initiative around that. And of course, the NFL is a very important property at ESPN and a huge content driver for us. Because quarterbacks are discussed 52 weeks a year, it seems like. So that was a good one for us to start off with. And the NFL itself has a passer rating. That's how they determine who their top quarterback is each year. And it's a system that's almost 40 years old and hasn't been changed once. It was actually designed without even using computers. And it only looks at 4 components of passing on a per-play basis. There's no game context. There's nothing that a quarterback does with his feet. And that's a very important part of the modern quarterback game. So it didn't ever really answer the question of what a quarterback does to contribute to scoring and winning. And we knew that we could create a tool that had some utility for us at ESPN to tell more sophisticated stories about probably the most important position in North American sports. So with that in mind, we also had great data at ESPN to take advantage of with the Stats Information Group. We have official NFL play-by-play going back 10 years, which was very important. But really, what really distinguished us was that we had this library of video track statistics, a team of professionals that were trained by Super Bowl winning quarterback Trent Dilfer, who've been charting every play in the NFL since the start of the 2008 season. And the way it was categorized lended itself to be analyzed very easily for us. So this was a great way to get some details to allow us to do some more comprehensive studies that would be part of our division of credit component, which Dean will talk about more in a few moments. So we started off looking at our play-by-play and created expected points and win probability models, which are really the framework of the total quarterback rating. And we were doing this division of credit analysis as well along the way. And concurrently, we were blessed at ESPN that there's people who played the game at ESPN who worked there all the time. So we were setting up a series of meetings with former players and coaches to pick their brain. When they're looking and evaluating quarterback play, what's important to them? It also allowed us to have a very open dialogue about some of the things that we were finding currently when we were doing our early steps in the division of credit analysis. Things such as who is to blame on certain types of sacks based on the formation, number of rushers, things of that nature, game and distance situations. It was very validating in the things that they were saying to us, so that we knew we were on the right path here. But one thing that was really clear in speaking to all these people is the emphasis they placed on analysts on game-changing plays. Close and late, fourth quarter, people who make the plays and people who don't. That's where the separation is between good and great or poor and let-go quarterbacks. So we needed to somehow try to capture this a little bit better. So we used our win probability model to create a leverage index to capture that clutch component. So fast forwarding over what was really the hard part was coding it all. And 10,000 lines of computer code later, we had an algorithm that gave us 3 seasons of past data to analyze, everything from a QBR for every single game and how many points they added on every single play. So it was rich in storytelling opportunities. But something just didn't seem just right to debut it with 2008 and beyond when in 2007, Tom Brady at that point had arguably the greatest season ever by a quarterback, an NFL record 50 touchdowns. At ESPN, we have the luxury of going to our videotape library and pulling the 16 game tapes and having Hank and his team review them all and apply those standards that we evaluate on every play that Trent taught us to that, run it through the algorithm, and come up with a QBR for that season, which is a good baseline, especially entering the 2011 season, being such a pass-happy league. So now that we had this in place, we'd also been in talks with our content team who does the Quarterback Initiative, and they gave us a few months heads up that they offered us, how about we do a show in the first week of August that introduces QBR to the TV audience. We'd already had plans with .com to ESPN.com to have a very strong online component explaining it, and Peter and some others were writing about it. So we had that already in place, but this was a great opportunity for us. And furthermore, they were able to secure Mike Tirico, Ron Jaworski, and John Gruden to be the talent that worked with us on the metric, explaining to the TV audience. So a huge opportunity for us, an hour in prime time about a stat, an advanced statistic that our team created. It was very satisfying and a little bit surreal, but that's how we did it. And if you're interested in that episode at all, we have DVDs at our stats information booth in the main hallway there, and it plays sometime on that loop too if you just want to stop by and watch a little bit of it. But now to take into the most interesting parts of it will be Dean Oliver.
Oh, we went backwards. Oh, wow. Okay, we introduced a slide there. Okay, so if you think about the quarterback position, it is about, they have an incredibly diverse role in generating wins, essentially, for a team. Our idea is to use the data that we have at a play level to really build up this whole body of work for a quarterback. So I talk about here what we did on each play, but really we are trying to incorporate the whole body of work. And when you sit back, you can't see every single play, but we have the ability to slice and dice this so that we can tell good stories about quarterbacks, to rank them overall, to rank them in different situations. And by doing things on every play, that gives us a methodology that's robust to all these questions. But if you're looking at a play, there's a lot of things that happen. First of all, how do you translate downs, distances, yard lines, touchdowns, these sorts of things into one common unit? So we developed, as Jeff mentioned, an expected points added metric. This is not entirely novel. I'll go through that. So the first step is, how good was the play? Expected points added. Second step was, how much was the quarterback responsible for? The concept of dividing credit is pretty important in sports, so we went through that process. We used Ben Elamar, who's a professor who's done a lot of work on this, to help us with that. And then finally, one of the things that came out of our consultation with the experts was that clutch time was important, clutch performance was important, and we added that as well. To get the total QBR rankings that you see on .com, you sum over all those plays. If you want to know what the QBR is on third downs, you sum over the third down kind of plays. And then for the purposes of communication, we did scale it between 0 and 100 because that's a fairly obvious scale. 100 obviously is great, 0 is bad. And over the course of a season, you end up with things along the lines of 75 being MVP level. So the first, I'll give a little bit of an overview on just the expected points method. I love this graph. I don't know if you all are graph people, but what this shows is the expected points for a team given where they are on the field. That's lines for first down, second down, third down, and fourth down with 10 yards to go, or if you're within the 10, goal to go. So that it goes up to that the very top line, basically the sideline of this field, would be 7 points. The next line down from that is 6. And then you can count down. It actually goes negative. When you're sitting at 4th and 10, say at your own 1, the expected points is negative. So it's not that your score will go down, but the concept is that the other team is more likely to get points. So this gives, I think this is a tremendous way for evaluating the situation. When you're talking about first down and 10 or second down and 5, which is more valuable. Football Outsiders has a way. This expected points is something that we do. The concept has been around for quite a long time, Brian Burke, not the one that has spoken here at Advanced NFL Stats, has another version of this. They're very similar to what we have. The concept then is on a play, if you go from, say, 1st and 10 at your own 20 to 2nd and 5 at the 25, you can see that the line actually goes down. So the expected points, and that actually you can't see here because that would be 2nd and 10. But the idea is that you, let's say it was 3rd and 10 at the 20, and you got 1st and 10 at the 40. It's gone up. So that's the value of a play. It's gone up expected points-wise. And now we need to divide that credit for a quarterback. And this is where I'll talk about some of the interesting lessons of dividing credit. First, the basic method is that you have a play. Say you gained 5 yards, and one of your rushers ran it. You have a bunch of rushers who will take attempts at rushes over the course of the year. Some of them, the result of that play, is it a function of the rusher ability, or is it a function of the offensive line ability? And the variability in rusher performance and the offensive line gives you some idea for how to divide the credit. So the things that we divided using methods along this line are things like completions, just the fact you caught the pass, not whether you ran with it. That would be yards after catch. Incompletions, interceptions, interception returns. We have sacks. And then also whether the quarterback had a rush, which would be a quarterback sneak, or a scramble. Those actually get divided differently because they are different things. So to go through, if I can make this work, there we go. Sacks, when we did this, some of the criticism that we received is that it was subjective. And one of the things that people really didn't like was sacks. Like, how can a sack be on a quarterback? But the premise is, we talk about it, and you hear it. We say, he kept a play alive. There are quarterbacks who are good at avoiding sacks. So if there's quarterbacks who are good at avoiding sacks, there's quarterbacks who are good at, who are basically bad at it, and they deserve some blame for it. And when we did the analysis, independent of what we're saying, we find that yes, sacks are a lot of times on quarterbacks. One of the basic examples we had in mind when we developed this was in New England. We have Tom Brady, who's notoriously good at avoiding sacks. He had a year where he was out, coincidentally and fortunately for us, and then Matt Castle took over. Matt Castle had some success, but what he wasn't good at was avoiding sacks. You see those sack percentages. For dropbacks, basically one of those numbers stands out as extra high. And that 8.2, that's Matt Castle. This is not an isolated case. Cutler versus his replacements in Chicago this past year. Jay Cutler, he got chased around a lot in the pocket. He kept plays alive. Did he get sacked much? Got sacked 7%. His replacements got sacked twice as much. So it is at least partly on a quarterback. So when we did our analysis, we did it a couple different ways to look at whether it was a regular rush by the defense or whether there was a blitz. Quarterback's supposed to read a blitz. The offensive line, they have less responsibility for that. The quarterback's supposed to help. And we find a little bit more blame essentially goes to the quarterback against the blitz. We found this interesting and useful, even though, yes, people will criticize this because, sometimes it looks like it's the offensive line, but there is a lot on the quarterback. Long passes. I hope I can explain this well because I know this can be tricky. So obviously when a quarterback throws a pass that ends up being a 20-yard gain, if he throws the ball 3 yards and his receiver runs through traffic to make it a 20-yard gain, it seems instinctively that it should be more credit to the receiver. There were a lot of yards after catch. If it was a 20-yard pass in the air, the receiver caught it and was down, that's more on the quarterback. Well, we find this. We got this. This is easy. I think this is not surprising. This is just basic stuff. I think what was less obvious was when we looked at so if there is no yards after catch, and you're throwing the ball, the quarterback is throwing the ball, and a guy catches it, and it is down. I think originally I thought that, well, on a longer pass play, if you're throwing it, the quarterback has to be more accurate, and the quarterback then should deserve more credit. What we found was not that. We actually found that on long passes, the receiver is doing more of the adjustment to catch the ball, whereas on a short route, the quarterback has to be right on. There's less time for a receiver to make the adjustments. When we found this in the analysis, first I asked Ben, are you sure? And he said yes. And we went through it, and yeah, it did make a lot of sense. And we went through it with the video tracking, and yeah, you realize that makes sense. So I'm hoping that's a bit of insight that makes sense to you as well. Randy Moss I show here because when Randy Moss was out there with Dante Culpepper, you could throw the ball up. I felt like I could be a quarterback. You throw it out to that guy in the general vicinity, and he'll go out and get it. And it really hit home that, okay, yes, receivers do have to make adjustments on those. They have the time to make those adjustments. So those are a couple examples. Let's talk about clutch weight so that I can get onto a couple interesting things. Clutch weight is something that isn't necessarily predictive. How well people play in the clutch is not necessarily predictive. We put it in, we know it is important because we heard it, and we continue to look for the value well, we know there is this value. We've seen it. It helps you win that game. The repeatability of it is sometimes difficult to validate. But what we did is we looked at how close a game is, win probability, how much can one play, pre-play, change your win percentage. And that gave us a sense for how clutch this play was. It could vary from quite low, about a quarter, up to 2.5 times, or about 2.5, with the average play being about a 1. So at the end of a game, if the game is really close, and you have if you're trailing by 4, and you have 4th and goal from the 3, 3rd and goal from the 3, clutch weight is very high. This is a play that means a lot, versus if it's near the end of the game and it's also 3rd and goal from the 3, but you're down 40. There's no clutch aspect to that. So we wanted to capture those things, and it was pretty important to, it was important in simple situations. Over the course of the year, some of this, it ends up washing out. In an important way, we did not give credit to quarterbacks who were in clutch situations more often. We essentially normalized by that, so that a quarterback who had a bad defense wasn't getting a bonus. So another thing that we heard when we introduced this was that there's no opponent adjustment. And we said we would introduce this at Sloan. We actually talked about introducing it earlier online. I don't think we ever did that. And it's unfortunate, but as you will see here, there's actually not a huge difference. When you look at some of the quarterbacks on the top 5 here that's shown, if you adjust for opponent, the top 5 remain the same in the same order. The bottom 5, they remain the same bottom 5. There's a little bit of an adjustment. Tim Tebow, I think, gets a little bit better with the opponent adjustment. The biggest changes were shown there, not huge differences. Matt Kessel goes down because he didn't face particularly tough defenses. He didn't play the whole year, these kind of things. On a team basis, though, it is actually interesting. When we look at the teams, some of these teams actually had to play better quarterbacks. The Detroit Lions had to play Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers a couple times. They had to play Phillip Rivers, and I know I'm forgetting somebody, but they had to play some really good quarterbacks. The fact that we ranked them not particularly high by their QBR allowed, well, that goes away when you adjust for who they had to play. Similarly, on the worst defenses, the Browns actually take a big hit. And this can be important if you are the Browns and you think your pass defense was okay. If you adjust for who they actually ended up having to play, they should know that actually they weren't very good. And I think for a planning purpose, that's where this kind of thing is helpful. Let's remove a little bit of that bias. I think that leads me into Peter's work. There you go.
You can hang on to the clicker.
That's true.
You want to click one more screen over because all my stuff is on
there you go.
one screen because I can't walk and you talk and use a clicker at the same time. Some of these numbers are really cool in them, of themselves. Other numbers are cool because they let us tell stories. And each week through this past season, I did a piece on Insider using some aspect of QBR to look at issues and situations involving quarterback performance. The coolest thing about QBR in terms of telling stories is that because it includes all aspects of quarterback play and situational performance, when you use it, you can actually have confidence that you're describing what happened in the game as opposed to a quirk in the statistics. In the very first week of last season, Michael Vick had a passer rating of 83.7, and Kerry Collins had a passer rating of 82.3, traditional passer rating. Virtually the same, virtually league average, except that Michael Vick threw 2 touchdowns, and one of them was a game-tying score. He ran for 98 yards on 10 carries. Kerry Collins fumbled twice, took 3 sacks. Most of his yards were in garbage time and a blowout loss. By the time he threw for a touchdown, his team was already losing 34-0. Passer rating saw those 2 games as equivalent. Vick's QBR was 68.4 in that game, and Collins was 2.3, the worst in the league. When you use those numbers, you're describing what happened in the game, not kind of statistical figments or quirks of the passer rating formula. So that lets us do a few things throughout the season. One is to look at how quarterbacks did in different kinds of situations. A good example is facing the blitz. When you look at how quarterbacks do versus 4 pass rushers, 5 pass rushers, or even more, like secondary blitzes, interesting groups emerge. For example, one group of quarterbacks saw their QBR go down facing a blitz, traditional blitzes, but not so much more when they faced secondary blitzes. Just looking at the numbers, the names that emerged in that group were Jason Campbell, Cam Newton, Tavares Jackson, Ben Roethlisberger. This whole group of guys who have enough mobility that the value of sending an extra rusher, a DB, against these guys is really limited. On the other hand, there are quarterbacks whose QBR actually went up against the blitz, but down when there was a secondary rusher involved, a deep defensive back blitzing. Those are guys like Eli Manning, Tom Brady, Matt Schaub. Again, we didn't pick the names out. The numbers just kind of culled them. And these are guys who usually have big, stable offensive lines, who can handle a blitz, but get rattled when that extra guy is in their face. But here's the interesting thing. The 10 quarterbacks that did the worst against the blitz got blitzed an average of 32% of the time. And the 10 quarterbacks who did the best against the blitz were blitzed an average of 31.1% of the time. So defenses aren't actually blitzing based on who's better or worse against the blitz, maybe because they don't have this information. They're still blitzing the way they always do, which is based on feel and when the game seems to call for extra aggression. Another thing we could look at, and we did look at, were career patterns. When you look at the QBRs of quarterbacks in their first few seasons in the league, you'll see that their third year correlates a lot more strongly with the first or the second year than years 1 or 2 do with each other. And that makes sense because you'll regress to the mean either by going up or down in your second year. If you're really high when you come in, you usually go down, or if you're really bad, you usually go up. But there are a few guys who keep going up. And then after the third year, you don't see a lot of improvement. Every now and then there are great seasons where everything comes together, like Brady in 2007 or Aaron Rodgers last year. But basically, after you have about 10,000 yards in the tank, that's where your QBR is going to stay as far as we can tell so far from the data. That's really good news for Matt Ryan, and that's really bad news for Mark Sanchez. I really liked using not just the QBR rating, which is scaled from 0 to 100 as a percentile score, but also the expected points added. For every quarterback, every week, we ran an estimate that these guys came up with of how many points quarterbacks were adding to their offenses and broke it down through different kinds of plays. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do with that. You can look at running versus passing. You can look at first, second, or third down, long passes versus short passes. One of the most interesting things was I took clutch-weighted expected points added and compared them to quarterbacks' cap value, how much in resources teams were expending in that given year. And by far, number 1 was Cam Newton. And in fact, I ended up writing that the last time a team had a quarterback this good, locked up for this long, this far below market value, was probably Tom Brady. Like I said, that also lets us look at different styles of play. Very early last season, I took a detailed look at Eli Manning. And when QBR first debuted, Eli Manning had the 7th highest QBR in the league in 2010. And that generated all kinds of, maybe you wrote some of them, all kinds of crazy emails about how this could possibly be true. When we took a closer look at Eli's season in 2010, 4 of his interceptions were outright drops. Another 8 bounced off the hands of Giants receivers. And he just didn't make hardly any. He made hardly any of the kind of mistakes that don't show up in game scores. He very rarely fumbled, very rarely took sacks. And when you look at the cost to other quarterbacks of making those kind of ball discipline mistakes, he ranks very high. One of the few quarterbacks who ranks even higher is Peyton Manning. He was unbelievable at limiting those kinds of mistakes. When you add it all up, the piece we did very early last year argued that Manning had just as good a 2010 as Phillip Rivers. And this season, everybody's seen him on a, kind of explode on a per-play basis. He wasn't actually better this year than last year, but because he was passing deep and passing deep effectively, he extended his play over a lot more plays. But his QBR has been pretty level and pretty high. Finally, I'll just say, one thing that's really interesting is that I wasn't sure going into this whether the things that QBR measured would have, that passer rating doesn't, would have any fantasy impact. After all, passer rating, counts touchdowns and counts a lot of, and QBR counts a lot of things which you're not sure, fumbles, sacks, rushing yards. Does that stuff really matter for fantasy? Well, if you line up quarterbacks' performance along fantasy scoring or traditional scoring categories, and you just compare this year's performance to next year's fantasy scoring, the correlation in most years is about 0.5, a little bit more than that. Some years everyone goes up, some years everyone goes down because some quarterbacks lose their jobs or whatever. Clutch-weighted expected points added had a correlation between 2009 and 2010 of 0.67. And that was the highest of anything I found. And I think that that is a really good indication, not just of a kind of a fantasy tip, but it's an indication that by capturing these aspects of performance that traditional stats don't, you're actually not just getting a better picture of how a quarterback performs in a given moment or a given game, but of his whole set of skills, which is going to carry over, which is important information to carry over in how you think he's going to do next year. Now, I'd love to tell you who that means you should draft, but we did that story in week 9, so you will have to come back to our pieces when we do our fantasy preview based on QBR to find out, who you should actually draft.
Good.
Thanks.
Yeah, so the earlier stuff I showed you, how do we get to QBR? For us, this team that I got here, and actually one who's not up here, it was actually a lot of fun to go through a lot of that methodology. I know there are some people out here, they want to hear about what Peter got to talk about, the fun stories, when you get to talk about players. We spent so much time going through a lot of things that are the nitty-gritty, the not so much fun stuff for other people. We do enjoy it. But we were very happy that people like Peter, we had a lot of other writers who were able to use this to tell stories that a lot of people do care about. They got, I don't know how many millions of page views associated with QBR, because you can tell stories, you can break it down a lot of different ways. And finally, when we got to the season, after the first few weeks, when we were completely stressed that it was going to make us look bad in some way or another, my group got to do a little bit of fun stuff too. And that's what I'm going to show you here. A couple things that we didn't necessarily put out there, but things that we did learn from working with this. One of the things, as I say here, is the measure of a quarterback is how well they throw when they're not necessarily under pressure. We like talking about these guys, oh yeah, when the pressure's on, and they mean this in kind of a vague way, they step up. Well, when there's actually a rush on them, when they're forced to move in the pocket, guys generally don't play very well. And what you'll see on this list is exactly that. The QBR for Donovan McNabb, who didn't even play full season, was 43 or so when he got forced. When there was duress, people were chasing him around when he had to run, these kind of things. 43 is not very high. You do see a couple guys on there who are pretty good. We do talk about Aaron Rodgers in particular as being able to run around, avoid sacks, and keep a play alive, make a throw on the run, these sorts of things. But still, QBR of 28 is not very good. If you can get pressure on a quarterback, it's helpful. Now look at the list, the top 5 list for when the QBR is not pressured, when they can just stand back there and throw. These are the guys that make a difference. These are the guys who win because the offensive line is doing their job, the quarterback is doing his job, the receivers are doing their job. These are the guys you want. And especially when you look, hopefully this works, at the worst guys when you're not pressured. When there is not pressure on these guys have time to throw, they're going to their first read, these kind of things. These guys have a harder time doing it. And you notice that list, those guys either had a job to start the season and lost it, or they picked up the job mid-season, and they don't necessarily have it. So Tim Tebow is on this list. I don't know where he stands next year. I think the popular claim probably means he's got first dibs on that. But yes, by QBR, clearly Tim Tebow, we didn't grade him particularly high, and he did not throw well when he had time, when he had his roots. He could read that, he didn't do very well at it. In fact, he took a lot of time to make his decisions. Which gets me at, lots of time in the pocket is actually bad. You'll hear on broadcast that he's got a lot of time. Look at all the time. Think about in the Super Bowl, Tom Brady's standing back there in his own end zone for quite a long period of time, and then finally the rush gets to him and he unloads. They call a safety because it was intentional grounding. No one was near him. That was a lot of time in the pocket. The offensive line did their job, but if you're having to take all that time, I think a quarterback gets nervous, or the defensive backfield is doing a great job. I can tell you that there are defenses out there that are not focused on putting pressure on the quarterback, but they are focused essentially on this aspect. There are the Kansas City Chiefs this last year. They were a coverage defense. They did not go after the quarterback. They sat back there and forced the quarterback to say, oh my God, these guys are all covered. Uh-oh, eventually someone's gonna hit me. And they made a bad throw. And that's what some of the numbers show. We thought it was an interesting story, but the stat itself, time in pocket, then becomes a very difficult number to use. We think we started getting it this past year, and it's interesting, but exactly how to use it, we're not sure. Some quarterbacks draw penalties. This was not in passer rating. There is nothing in passer rating on penalties. And frankly, we were a little surprised to see this pattern, that over the last 4 years, Joe Flacco and Matt Ryan end up being amongst the leaders in expected points added through penalties. This, it's not a huge part. Certainly a quarterback, most of their job is to complete passes. But it does help these guys. It helps these guys a little bit. And when we dig into it, it looks like these guys are good at drawing teams off sides, and they do draw either defensive pass interference or legal contact penalties, surprisingly a little bit higher than other guys. Eli Manning is actually another one who tends to be on the list here too. He doesn't make the top 3. His brother did one year. But another interesting story that we saw as we went through this. And this is when I let Jeff finish this up.
All right, we'll have time for questions after this. So we correlate very high with winning. This just shouldn't be surprising because our goal was to be capturing the right things that a quarterback does that relates to winning and scoring. So we weren't trying to maximize this by any stretch. But when we did look at it, we were pleasantly surprised that over the last 4 years that the team with the higher QBR in a game wins 87% of the time. And that is obviously much higher than some other stats you see on there, including NFL passer rating, which is higher than I thought it'd be, but it still has touchdowns and interceptions, so those are pretty important statistics. And turnover differential is something that coaches and teams talk about, winning the turnover battle, how important that is. QBR the last 4 weeks of 2011 season, it was actually 63-1. The team had the better. The only one we lost, before you're asking yourself, is the Week 17 shootout with the Lions and the Packers, the Matt Flynn Stafford game. So that was one that could have went either way, and it just fell on the wrong side of the ledger for us. But But what really underscored was that we were capturing the right type of information, and in the modern NFL game more than ever, having good quarterback play and being able in turn to stop the other team's quarterback was really important in determining who actually won the game. So what's next? So this is just the tip of the iceberg here for this framework. The QBR was a great place to start, but because we have the win probability, and especially the expected points, and the database that we have for their video track statistics, it does lend itself to having studies on other positions. So right now we are dividing credit on pass plays, and for that team EPA, we have the quarterback, which we put in QBR, but there's also the offensive line, the blockers, and there's the receiver part of it. We're just kind of throwing that in a bucket right now and haven't publicized that. But that's the kind of stuff that lends us to having skill position type ratings, individual offensive line, because we have player participation data on every play as well, so we actually know who's on the field, and in defensive ratings and things of that nature. So it's pretty limitless that way. College version, something we actually have actively been working on. College QBR offers itself a whole different set of obstacles than the NFL version. The data isn't as rich. There's 4 times as many teams. The opponent adjustment is critical in college QBR because the difference of the style of play, who you play matters. It's not a balanced or semi-balanced schedule like the NFL. So that's a very important part of that. More charting. This can be interpreted 2 different ways. Hank and his team can maybe chart a few new statistics this year that will give us even more details, help us refine the NFL QBR. We also can be more charting, can be the Tom Brady example, where we can go back to our video library and pull maybe another season, just take the last 10, 11 years, maybe every postseason game since the 2000 season, so we have a library of all postseason games, because right now our postseason library only goes back to 2008. My dream is to get a charting for all the Super Bowls. So in a couple of years, we're at our 50th anniversary of the Super Bowl. We could have QBRs for all the 100 quarterbacks that started in those games. Going backwards in time, so how can we get QBR for maybe the games that we don't have in our library, or we don't have a good, we can't video track all of those games. So is there a way to estimate an historical QBR? We think we can, and actually it's been done. Pro Football Reference had a study after we did QBR where they took a stab with a decent, I think it was an 85% correlation or something of that nature. But we think that we probably could improve on that a little bit, knowing the inner workings of the system a little bit closer. So that's an opportunity there to kind of go back and get some historical context to these QBR numbers that we're generating currently. And our own website at ESPN. What we got out on ESPN.com for this season was great given the time frame that we were working with and the other priorities that we have in digital publishing. So we were really pleased we were able to bring week-by-week QBR, game-by-game QBR, and have that there. And they were able to go back and put up there every QBR for all the games going back to 2008, which is very useful as well. But we have so much other stuff that we've already touched on, the underlying data, some of the other ways that we can split the EPA, and some of the other kind of cool things that we can do to bridge out the editorial piece and to share that more directly. So that's something that we're actively working on as well, to bring the user, the fan experience, closer to what we're seeing and have a little bit more engagement in that area. You want to address
Good.
these?
Now we're up for questions, right? So where we are?
So you want to, they're up there, but I have a nice list.
These are the
So we'll start with
frequently
what I have
asked
in my
ones,
hand.
and we've answered them. I think we answered actually these on the
Well,
website.
I'll consult that, but I'll use what I have in my hand here. So, Dean, the first one's for you. Unfortunately, it's from Anonymous, so I can't give anyone credit. But they say they love the Brady Castle example. But what happens for quarterbacks that consistently play year after year? What proxy you use for that?
Repeat the question. I want to make sure I understand.
So we used the examples that we
Yep.
showed were quarterback A was a quarterback
Yep.
here, and then that season or the next season there was someone else who replaced it, and that was very easy to find those differences. How do we analyze the statistics for quarterbacks that are more consistently playing with the offensive lines? Peyton or an Eli, who take every snap at least up until this year.
Right. Yeah. So I am. My recollection on this is that we did have enough variation within a same line for enough different situations, not just across a whole season, but of course of games, because that happened quite frequently this past year. With, I think there were 12 teams that had a number of different quarterbacks get at least 30, 50 snaps, so that you could do some sort of variation with that and estimate some of these numbers.
When you take the data back to 2008, I think Dean's
Yeah,
right. There were enough that we could find variation.
We don't need a full season, fundamentally. Over the course of a few games, you get some variation enough to make that division.
Okay, so from MP Lich, if you could make one change to QBR, what would it be? Only one change.
Only one? There's always a lot of little things that we look at. I think one of the things that does sit a little bit on my mind is that we fundamentally have to do it on a per play basis, because we're going to be looking at how well did they play on third down versus second down, or versus a zone versus five or more rushers. And these are great. I think one of the things I wonder about is whether that is the right basis for evaluating a quarterback overall. And we talked about some sort of QBR per drive, because if you go 80 yards in 3 plays versus 80 yards in 12 plays, why should the three-play drive be 4 times better than the 12-play drive? In many cases, actually, the longer drive is better. So I don't know how we do that, but it's something that we've talked about. I think for most of the work that we do, that doesn't affect anything. But I think it's a great conceptual question that hopefully we can figure out over the near future.
Okay, well, one of those says, explain the clutch index. You did talk about that, but someone AAA says, can you please tell us more in depth your definition of clutch?
I don't know if I can say easily more about what is clutch. Because I think we have our own vague idea of what is clutch. Because we give an example that we gave to other people as well. So that third down and goal when you're down 4 and time is running out, that is clearly a clutch situation. But say it's third and 8 from your own 30 with 4 seconds to go in the game and you're down 4. And you throw the ball and it drops, it's incomplete. Was that clutch, not clutch? And if it was actually completed and you score the winning touchdown, is that clutch? So is the play result define what is clutch? Or was the situation clutch? And we defined it on a situational basis. So I think there is a lot that we could talk about with regard to clutch stuff. There's a lot of math, but those kind of situations raise the philosophical difficulty in defining what it is.
But it's a leverage index based on win probability. It's not someone assigning if that play is clutch or not.
It's
the math of what's happening in the score, the differential, the time remaining.
It's a win probability. We looked at the range of win probabilities that can come out of a situation. And if the range was bigger, it's more clutch. If the range was smaller, it's low clutch.
So to explain the scale, a clutch rate of 1 is a completely league average play. I believe it's average play changed win probability by 2.4% for
about right.
an average play.
Yeah.
So if in situations in the past, that play changes the win probability 2.4%, that's going to be a clutch rate of 1. Going up from there is be a more clutch play. Going down would be a less clutch.
Over the course of the year, when we showed this on ESPN.com, the clutch weight that's being applied, almost everyone was right around 1. There were some that 0.8, and there were some 1.2. I think we may have had a 1.4 for somebody, but again, then we're normalizing that based on opportunity, so no one's getting a boon there.
Yep.
This one's for Hank and Albert from Kerry Willis. Talk more about the subjective elements of the video tracking. Who makes these decisions?
We got a lot of things about is it subjective, is it not subjective. There's subjectivity in every sport. I was just at your panel, and assists in the NBA are subjective. Yeah, you could always argue that pass was either overthrown or dropped, but in those situations where it is a lot less clearly defined, because a lot of them are actually pretty clear cut, we'll try to get a consensus. We have a tracking team of 12 or so people, and if the first person isn't quite sure, we'll get a second person. If they're still not sure, we'll get a third person or fourth person until we get to a consensus. Hey, that's either a drop or an overthrow or an underthrow, or whatever we define the result of the play as.
I think 2 of the best play types we define are incompletions and rushes. Differentiating a rush between a scramble and a design rush changes the division of credit a ton. A scramble is a lot on the quarterback. He's the one who improvised the play. He's the one who made the play happen. Where design rush, quarterback by design gets help from the offensive line, from everyone else on the play. And incompletions is huge too. The difference between a drop and an overthrow and the way you divide credit for the quarterback on that play is massive. quarterback shouldn't be blamed as much for a drop as he should if he overthrew a guy 10 yards.
You talked about scramble and rush, and you talked about clutch. This works out perfectly. One of the biggest plays of the season for us, as far as the weight that was placed on that, was the Tim Tebow game-winning run against the Jets. So that was a situation where it was late. He did it with his legs, and so there wasn't, other than a little bit of blocking, a lot of it was on him. So he got a lot of credit for that type of play, and they won the game because of that play. At least they took the lead, and they gave him a great chance of winning based on the win probability. But that was a tough one, because was it a scramble or was it a rush? And we had a lot of debate, looked at it, and I think, Hank, you went back and actually listened to Tebow's conference afterwards, where he gave some audio about it, and he said that was a scramble, so that helped us.
Yeah,
Things like that.
it's the one question I wanted, and it happened to be the last question they asked him in a 15-minute press conference.
Better late than never, but that helped us, because we had it as a scramble, but then we had that, and when people were
they
still
just kind of
asking
verified
about
the
it,
decision.
verified, exactly.
And I will say, fortunately, our analysis, the analysis we do to generate these numbers, to divide credit, is based upon the fact that really there is some subjectivity. If there were a cleaner line on all cases between scrambles and rushes, which is actually pretty clean most of the time, or drops it's a little bit fuzzier, then you would get more clear division of credit. And our numbers actually automatically adjust in some sense.
The Welker play is a good example of that, too. You talked about that in the last panel.
Yep.
That we got a lot of questions on that. Was it a drop? Was it not? Did Brady make the right throw? He was turning around.
The Welker play in the Super Bowl, you're talking
the Super
about.
Bowl, I'm sorry. We did have that as a drop. And we have a pretty strict definition of what a drop is, compared to maybe some other people that chart drops. But that was a drop, but it's not 100% blame on Welker, and Brady doesn't get a free pass on it. It's still a negative play for the team. It's just how we divide the credit amongst the team, or the blame in that aspect.
Yeah, there are drops that just go right into your hands, and there's drops like Welker's drop that, shoot, to get hands on that. And not every receiver would, I would say, even get their hands on that. Most of them would, but there's different grades of a drop, and that's why a drop is not 100% on a receiver. There's a fraction that's for sure that goes on a quarterback, because some of them are overthrown or underthrown.
Peter, there's a question about breakout players for next year. I know you referenced that as your fantasy column, so I assume you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but any
Well, we did
dark
when we did
horses?
the look at how quarterbacks' first seasons correlate with each other in QBR. We did that as part of a story that looked at what factors might lead quarterbacks to break out next season, and I think the other factors were like plays for a good organization, had good college stats that were relevant, has developing wide receivers and tight ends, and you put that together with who looked good in the right way, the going up in QBR, and we came up with Andy Dalton and Sam Bradford as likely, well, Dalton is likely breakout in a way that like Stafford did this year, and Bradford is a likely rebound candidate. I love Cam Newton, but in looking at his all kinds of coverages and threw whatever the score was and just kept throwing and throwing and throwing, and as the team gets better, he might not be able to do that, so I'm not sure he should be, that's why he wasn't on that breakout list.
It's a question to anybody. What do you guys think were some of the biggest surprises as far as any of the past seasons, but 2011 since it's most fresh, about the way people ended up in QBR? That maybe what our numbers are showing versus the perception of the quarterback, or maybe what other rating systems were saying. It's a loaded question.
I'm always surprised that I grew up a Cowboys fan, and the way the Cowboys are now, I watch Tony Romo, and he makes some of these plays that just drive me crazy, and he still ends up being pretty high. That sort of thing always surprises me. But
I say Tony Romo and Matt Ryan are people that, for whatever reason, year after year do really well in our system. They're not the
well.
upper echelon people, but they're in that group of people with Eli and Ben and some other people, and Phillip Rivers, who maybe the common fan doesn't think they are at that high, but that's where they end up every year.
You see it in what Dean was talking about penalties, which are completely untracked and nobody keeps track of what quarterbacks are good or bad at enticing opponent penalties. There was a season, I think it was 2 years ago, where Matt Ryan added, was it 14 points? Like 2 touchdowns
2009.
by inducing opponent penalties, which is a lot of points to not
was
be
huge.
showing up in statistics.
Which are mostly defensive pass interference. Those are the ones that change expected points the most. And
Yeah,
he
some-
had a ton of them that year.
Right.
But Matt Ryan is particularly good at drawing guys offside, and he had big defensive PI.
And not committing them, too, though. I mean, it's a net points, is it not?
Yeah, there's also, quarterback is also responsible for a delay of game and these kinds of things too. And he's good at avoiding that. He manages the offense quite well, and I think that.
We actually did a piece on who's underrated based on looking at whose QBR was higher or lower than you'd expect from their passing stats. And Carson Palmer had a higher QBR than you'd expect based on his traditional numbers, and he was playing really tough opponents, and he was kind of thrust into the situation. And so I think he's an interesting person to watch for next year.
I always kid with my colleague Alo Patani. Tim Tebow took a year off the end of our lives this year, trying to explain why QBR didn't see him as better, because his QBR is so correlated with winning. Tebow runs. He seems like the perfect guy for QBR, but as Dean showed, he was low all season, just like he was in passer rating and most other metrics. So wouldn't be a football panel if I didn't bring up Tebow.
That's because he looks at all four quarters of the game.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, if we look at the first 50 minutes of a game, and we did this a lot on TV with graphics, the first 51 minutes of the game, he was horrific in QBR. I mean, single digits for the course of the whole season, taking that 51 minutes of a 60-minute game. But that last 9 minutes, he was in the high 90s. He was first or second, I believe, in the final 9 minutes of the game. He actually performed very poorly in the 3 overtime games they had.
Well, except for the playoff Steeler game.
Well, that's regular season only.
Right.
Yeah.
Playoffs, that was a pretty big play in the playoffs, which we have separate, but we haven't combined that rating
The
yet.
one playoff game, I forget who he was playing, but they went to overtime, and the other team essentially, Tebow went 3 and out. Then the other team got the ball, fumbled. Tebow got the ball back, went 3 and out, and Denver kicked the field goal to win. So Tebow did terrible in overtime, but he was the winning quarterback on a
The
team
winning
that
streak alive.
Yeah.
exactly came back and won, and he literally could not have done any worse in that overtime.
I would
Every
say,
single
yeah.
play
Took
was
a
at that
third
point.
down sack too, didn't he?
Exactly. One was a sack that almost kicked him out of field goal range.
And these guys had to deal with the Tebow questions on a regular basis because, yeah, we had Tebow frequently low, but he won the game, and we had to go show, yes, well, yeah, a lot of times Tebow was not on the field when the big plays occurred.
That's exactly right.
Do we want to talk about it all? Eli Manning, you mentioned Eli Manning, some of the things that he does that don't show up. Going back a few questions to you, we talked about breakout people for next year. I know if I was asked last year, going into the season, anyone on our team, that was one that really stood out to us was Eli, especially at ESPN. We had to defend ourselves. We were educating people internally here's the 2010 QBRs, and especially Giants fans work at ESPN just couldn't believe Eli finished so high in our standings. I think he actually was 7th, not 2nd last year. Peyton was 2nd, but Eli was 7th, and they went 10-6. They just missed the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
They scored a lot of points. He threw for 4,000 yards, but they remember them missing the playoffs, even though it was on a punt return. And they remember the 25 interceptions. Of course, our analysis shows a lot of that. I think 11 hit receivers in their hands, 4 were actually drops
Legit
that end up
drops.
being caught before they hit the ground. So we were saying, hey, Eli's better. We think Eli's been pretty consistent. He's better than what the perception is, what other certainly what passer rating is showing. Now, he had almost the same rating this year for us after his breakout season, so
Exactly.
we have been consistent. I'm not sure what to say about that.
Yeah, we went on New York sports radio before the season defending him, and people, you could get this sense that the guy on the other end of the phone line is shaking his head thinking we're crazy. And we go through the season, okay, yeah, see, Eli's doing well, and people are saying he's great. And then it overreacts. Yeah, the people, all of a sudden, he's great. And we do have him so consistent. It was...
But there's a big lesson in why it seemed to people why Eli had such a great season this year, even though his QBR was the same or a little bit lower, is because he did generate more points because he was in for more plays. Now, he plays every game, so how can that be true? The lesson in Eli, I think, is that passing is more efficient than running on the whole. A lot of fans don't think about it like that, but kind of by necessity, the Giants morphed into this deep passing team this year. Well, by throwing deep, you keep drives alive more, you stay on the field more, you generate more points at the same level of productivity. And so he looked much better, but it was because he was in for more plays, because he was passing at that same level, but throwing more.
You got anything else?
Dude, any stories? Actually, you know what? I'm going to talk about college QBR for a second.
Oh, yeah.
And what we're doing with college QBR, I hit on it very briefly on some of the differences. What have you seen so far in doing some early analysis?
Well, we don't have any players to talk about, but college QBR is going to be a little bit more difficult because we don't have clones of Hank and his team to track everything that's out there. I think the college game, as Jeff alluded to, the adjustment for opponent is going to be really, really big because the variations are just enormous across that. And actually, I know that I don't know if they're here, but I talked to a couple people yesterday who have been doing a lot on college football and have looked at some of the variations among teams. And I think that's going to be a much more important component. We'd probably roll it out after a few weeks, because after the first week, you don't know how good those opponents are. But it'll be useful as the idea for college QBR right now is to evaluate college quarterbacks for the purpose of college coverage. Ultimately, of course, we do want to do some evaluation for how college quarterbacks become NFL quarterbacks. And we think that college QBR and the NFL QBR are going to be important components of that.
Any other questions? I think that's about all I have prepared right now.
That was good.
We're about 2 minutes late. That's good.
All right.
So thank you very much.
Yep.